Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
And I'm Dan.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we read about Fëanor creating the Silmarils, the three great jewels infused with the light of the two trees. Melkor lusts over the Silmarils, and his evil works come to fruition. The chasm between Fëanor and Fingolfin widens, and he openly speaks of rebellion against the Valar. Today we continue Chapter 7 of Quenta Silmarillion, beginning on page 69 of the second edition. Then there was great unrest in Tirion, and Finwë was troubled, and he summoned all his lords to council. But Fingolfin hastened to his halls and stood before him, saying, King and father, wilt thou not restrain the pride of our brother Cruin Finwë, who is called the Spirit of Fire, all too truly? By what right does he speak for all our people, as if he were king? Thou it was who long ago spoke before the Quendi, bidding them accept the summons of the Valar to Aman. Thou it was that led the Noldor upon the long road through the perils of Middle-earth, to the light of Eldamar. If thou dost not now repent of it, 2 sons at least thou hast to honor thy words. But even as Fingolfin spoke, Fëanor strode into the chamber, and he was fully armed, his high helm upon his head, and at his side a mighty sword. So it is even as I guessed, he said. My half-brother would be before me with my father, in this as in all other matters. Then turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, Get thee gone, and take thy due place. Fingolfin bowed before Finwë, and without word or glance to Fëanor, he went from the chamber. But Fëanor followed him, and at the door of the king's house he stayed him, and the point of his bright sword he set against Fingolfin's breast. See, half-brother, he said, this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls. These words were heard by many, for the house of Finwë was in the great square beneath the Mindon. But again Fingolfin made no answer, and passing through the throng in silence, he went to seek Finarfin, his brother. Now the unrest of the Noldor was not indeed hidden from the Valar, but its seed had been sown in the dark, and therefore, since Fëanor first spoke openly against them, they judged that he was the mover of discontent, being eminent in self-will and arrogance, though all the Noldor had become proud. And Manwë was grieved, but he watched and said no word. The Valar had brought the Eldar to their land freely, to dwell or to depart. And though they might judge departure to be folly, they might not restrain them from it. But now the deeds of Fëanor could not be passed over, and the Valar were angered and dismayed, and he was summoned to appear before them at the gates of Valmar, to answer for all his words and deeds. There also were summoned all others who had any part in this matter, or any knowledge of it. And Fëanor, standing before Mandos, in the ring of doom, was commanded to answer all that was asked of him. Then, at last, the root was laid bare, and the malice of Melkor revealed. And straightway Tulkas left the council to lay hands upon him and bring him again to judgment. But Fëanor was not held guiltless, for he it was that had broken the peace of Valinor, and drawn his sword upon his kinsman. And Mandos said to him, Thou speakest of thraldom, If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it. For Manwe is king of Arda, and not of Aman only. And this deed was unlawful, whether in Aman or not in Aman. Therefore this doom is now made. For 12 years thou shalt leave Tirion, where this threat was uttered. In that time take counsel with thyself, and remember who and what thou art. But after that time this matter shall be set in peace, and held redressed, if others will release thee. Then Fingolfin said, I will release my brother. But Fëanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council, and departed from Valmar. With him into banishment went his 7 sons, and northward in Valinor they made a strong place and treasury in the hills. And there at Formenos a multitude of gems were laid in hoard, and weapons also. And the Silmarils were shut in a chamber of iron. Thither also came Finwë the king, because of the love that he bore to Fëanor. And Fingolfin ruled the Noldor and Tirion. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true in seeming, though Fëanor, by his own deeds, had brought this thing to pass. And the bitterness that Melkor had sown endured, and lived still long afterwards, between the sons of Fingolfin and Fëanor. Now Melkor, knowing that his devices had been revealed, hid himself, and passed from place to place as a cloud in the hills. And Tulkas sought for him in vain. Then it seemed to the people of Valinor that the light of the trees was dimmed, and the shadows of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time. It is told that for a time Melkor was not seen again in Valinor, nor was any rumor heard of him, until suddenly he came to Formenos and spoke with Fëanor before his doors. Friendship he feigned, with cunning argument, urging him to his former thought of flight from the trammels of the Valar. And he said, Behold, the truth of all that I have spoken, and how thou art banished unjustly. But if the heart of Fëanor is yet free, and bold as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him, and bring him far from this narrow land. For am I not Vala also? Yea, and more than those who sit in pride in Valimar. And I have ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda. Now Fëanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Fëanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasure within the realm of the Valar. But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he designed. And Fëanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then hate overcame Fëanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor, and bade him be gone, saying, Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow of Mandos. And he shut the door of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. Then Melkor departed in shame, for he was himself in peril, and he saw not his time yet for revenge. But his heart was black with anger, and Finwë was filled with great fear. And in haste he sent messengers to Manwë in Valmar. Now the Valar were sitting in council before their gates, fearing the lengthening of the shadows, when the messengers came from Formenos. At once Orome and Tolkis sprang up, but even as they set out in pursuit, messengers came from Eldamar, telling that Melkor had fled through the Kalakiria, and from the hill of Tuna the elves had seen him pass in wrath as a thundercloud. And they said that thence he had turned northward, for the Teleri in Alqualonde had seen his shadow going by their haven toward Aman. Thus Melkor departed from Valinor, and for a while the two trees shone again unshadowed, and the land was filled with light. But the Valar sought in vain for tidings of their enemy, and as a cloud far off that looms ever higher, borne upon a slow cold wind, a doubt now marred the joy of all the dwellers in Aman, dreading they knew not what evil yet might come. So to summarize what we just heard, the anger and the mistrust between the Noldor finally boils over. Fëanor openly opposes his half-brother Fingolfin, even threatening him with his sword. Because the peace of Aman is disrupted, Fëanor and other involved parties are forced to stand before Mandos and recount the events. Melkor's role is revealed in this, and he goes into hiding in Aman. Fëanor is banished from Tirion for 12 years and founds a stronghold north of Tirion in Formenos. Here he is joined by his father Finwë and his sons, while Fingolfin leads the Noldor in Tirion. Melkor makes another attempt to turn Fëanor against the Valar and finds an opportunity to steal the Silmarils, but Fëanor is not fooled and immediately casts Melkor out. Melkor, in shame and in rage, retreats to the north of Aman. There's a lot. We're really getting some action now, huh?
One thing I love about Tolkien is each character, when they speak, you can totally imagine that specific character speaking that way. Mm. It's a thing about great writers and filmmakers is that their characters will speak like no other character. And when they speak, they reveal their character. And you find that with each of these. Like the way Mandos speaks, the way Fëanor speaks, we finally get words from him. Mm-hmm. The cunning of Melkor, like the way he speaks to Fëanor outside his door, is like, oh my gosh, he's such a silver tongue. Like he knows exactly what to say up until the last moment. Yeah. So I just love that.
That is kind of a bummer. I really wish, like, in the future, when people reread this, they hear my voice for all the characters.
If I ever do an animated film of the Silmarillion, I'll just have you voice all the characters.
All of them.
A couple of points for the listeners as well. There's a lot of synonyms for different and pseudonyms for people in this. So Cúrú Finwë, if it wasn't obvious, is Fëanor. So that's in the opening part of the reading when Fingolfin hastens to the council and says, "King and father, wilt thou not restrain the pride of our brother Cúrú Finwë?" That's referring to Fëanor. And then later on, you see, Fëanor kind of reveals his hand a little bit by putting a sword in it and placing it on his half brother's chest. Mm-hmm. We see his kind of like, if you remember when Finwë remarried after Miriel's death, he wasn't happy with the arrangement and what came forth. So you see that kind of, he's now it's time to kind of get at his half brothers. And then later on as well, we have Formenos, which is a new place that's being introduced. It appears that Fëanor is forgiven by Fingolfin. He says, and guys, you can help me understand this better. But then Fingolfin said, "I will release my brother." But Fëanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council and departed from Valmar. So it seems like it's like, oh, whatever, man. Like, I'm out. And then he creates Formenos, which is the stronghold where the Silmarils are being held.
Right. He still kind of has to carry out the sentence of being banished from Tyrion.
Yeah, Mandos says, after that time, this matter shall be set in peace, if others will release thee. So it reveals more about Fingolfin, too, who's like, I release my brother right now. I don't need to wait, 12 years. I release you right now, which is really cool.
Yeah. I underline that he specifically referred to him as his brother, because earlier Fëanor himself called him his half-brother, right? Wow. And he kind of, that intentionality with the language, I think that's
beautiful. Part
of Fingolfin's character, that he embraces him as a full brother.
He's quick to forgive, yeah.
Yeah. I wrote a note in this section where everyone has to go speak before Mandos, and it says, Fëanor was commanded to answer all that was asked of him. And I wrote a note just wondering, as I read it, I just stopped at that sentence and I thought, this is such a tangled mess. Even if Fëanor says everything he knows, are they really going to discover that Melkor is at the root of it? Because everyone kind of believes it's their own thoughts, and it's just been these subtle seeds planted. And then the very next sentence, they did, in fact, discover that Melkor's at the root of it.
The knowledge and wisdom and subtlety of the Valar as well, that they would be able to, you imagine the questions they must have asked to investigate the core of this problem, like where it came from.
Yeah,
and Tulkas immediately just runs off to go fight him.
He's the executioner.
It's interesting how, the main they're not Valar. Are they Valar? Tulkas of Valar? What is he?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm getting confused. It's funny how when they come back into the story, because they're featured here in and here out. It's like at a 30,000 foot view of them. It's like we bring them to Mandos and he has to answer questions, but that's all we really hear about Mandos. And then we discover that Tulkas just kind of gets up and storms out to search for him. And then later on, it's like Orome and Tulkas spring up to kind of pursue him again. But that's all we hear about them. We don't hear the inner motives and their plan and how they're going to carry it out.
Like so how Mandos likes his eggs in the morning.
I kind of want to know, does he like it sunny side up, with a little bit of white on there, or does he like to flip it over, or does he spoon the hot grease over his egg?
How do you think eggnog likes
or does he?
Eggs? You know what I mean?
Or maybe he's the kind of guy who doesn't know how to order eggs the way he likes, so he just says scrambled because that's all he knows how to order. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit of a bachelor.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever go into depth.
You do kind of have to piece things together, don't you? But I do remember Tulkas especially. It kind of has mentioned he never trusted Melkor again, even when he was captured after the war. Tulkas never trusted him again, and even when he was, going to be set free again, Tulkas still didn't trust him. So he was, even though he didn't rebel against Manwë's judgment, he still was ready to go at a moment's notice if Melkor did anything bad.
Tolkien is definitely more interested in the humbler characters, the ones that aren't quite as big and grandiose.
But I also appreciate him letting your imagination run with it, not saying just enough. We don't need to hear the whole council, the whole what happened in the Ring of Doom to find the answer, but the fact that the Valar were able to discern that Melkor was at the core of it all, I think our imagination will do better than any author could. And in a lot of these situations, less is more, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the Valar, I wanted to ask you guys a question. There's this particular line I'm looking at the top of page 71, and Mandos is speaking, and he says, "If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it, for Manwë is king of Arda, and not of Aman only. And this deed was unlawful, whether in Aman or not in Aman." So Manwë is like the king of the whole world, not just of Aman. So even if this were committed elsewhere, it's still kind of this active, unlawful act against Manwë and his authority. But it made me wonder, and I'm curious what you guys think. Is Manwë a good king?
Camway, what do you think?
My name is Silmarillion.
Oh, sorry. Oops. You changed your name.
Well, as soon as I heard about the Silmarillions, I was like, I want to. It's like my kids when they watch a movie. I'm the princess girl. Like they want to say who they are, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm the Silmarillions.
You're the book.
I don't see.
Can't I be a Camaril too? Though there's multiple.
Yeah, Camaril. That's pretty good.
No, you can be a Greg Nog or whatever. Like you have to fit your name into it.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't see any reason to suppose that Manwë is not a good king. Because he's the closest to Iluvatar, and the description of Melkor was that, or Sauron was that. Well, this is kind of backwards now, but I was saying that Sauron serves another, and Melkor only serves himself. But every time we hear about Manwë, he's seeking the counsel of Iluvatar. He seems to be the highest, but still obedient to Iluvatar. I don't see any kind of, pride in him. What do you think?
Well, I wonder, there's a difference between him having good character or moral principles and being a good ruler. I wondered that because maybe he was a little too trusting of Melkor when he said, "Yeah, I'm good now. I was rehabilitated in prison in chains, and I'm happy now, and I love everybody, and I want to heal the world." And some of the other Valar didn't believe that, but I don't know. Was he too naive to take the proper action? And
maybe naive, yeah. I don't think that makes him a bad ruler. The fact that Iluvatar set him up as the king, and that he shows no sign of, his own will coming in the way. He's just leading. Yeah, my assumption is he's the greatest of the Valar. That doesn't mean he's the least naive.
Who is Mando speaking to when he says, "Thou speakest of thraldom"? ...
He's speaking to Fëanor. He says,
speaking to Fëanor. But why? When
Fëanor
did
is
Fëanor
suggesting
speak
to
of
people.
thraldom?
Fëanor is suggesting that the Valar want to create a thraldom where the elves serve the Valar. And so
he's saying
Mandos is saying it doesn't matter if you leave or not. Even if you leave, you'll still.
Yeah.
If it is really a thraldom, you're still a thrall because Manwë's reach is everywhere.
So then he says, "Therefore doom is now made. For 12 years thou shalt leave Tirion where this threat was uttered." Is he talking specifically to Fëanor there, or is that more generalized to?
That's to Fëanor. That's to Fëanor too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
One other thought I had, we talked about the light recently, and we were wondering about the nature of the light of the trees. How did it illuminate? And one thing it mentions here is that the light of the trees is dimmed, and it follows, "And the shadows of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time." And that was kind of interesting. The trees were brighter before, but there weren't really shadows. They didn't cast shadows.
Yeah.
It was almost like the light just wrapped
when the light
around
gets
everywhere.
brighter and more intense, the shadows are darker.
Right.
So it's interesting that when these lights go dim, the shadows get darker.
It's kind of like they were so bright that they just overcame the shadows. But now the shadows kind of have gained some hold, or there's an absence of light that normally would have been.
That's a good
covering up the
find.
shadows.
Yeah, and also there's also maybe a cosmological hat tip again. We're talking about waxing and waning of noontime and summer times, winter times, that kind of stuff. Um, Shadows grow longer and darker if the sun is directly above, the shadow is like not long at all. So in the noon, the shadow is like at its 0 point. And then as it gets towards the evening or as it gets closer into winter, the shadows are growing longer and darker. So it's another reminder on a cosmological level.
It does mention it right at the end of this chapter too that once Melkor departs, the light is brought back to a certain degree. Like his darkness is no longer in Valinor, so the light. It says the land was filled with light, and it kind of reminds me of like how just before sunset or at sunset, really, there's like the certain glory of the sunlight. It might not actually be lighter, but sometimes you see like clouds are illuminated in a certain way that just makes it look like the whole sky is on fire. And there's something about that too. Like just before sundown, there's kind of like this last.
For a photographer, it's the golden hour, right? At sunrise and sunset, you have this sort of beautiful time, and then it's real dark.
You know how Marvel has the what if series? Like, what if this happened? And you see all the consequences of like, what if this person was Iron Man or whatever? You have so many what ifs. Well, my what if for this is if Fëanor and Melkor went off together. Like, wouldn't that be interesting to see like the story of Fëanor and Melkor together? And at what point would Fëanor like fight to usurp the throne, or would he become twisted and one of his slaves? That'd be interesting.
I actually think it's the fault of Fëanor that is the saving grace. Not, I think in your summary you said he's able to see through it and like reject him or something. But I think it's the fault of Fëanor. I think that he, in perceiving in Melkor a fierce lust for the Silmarils, it's jealousy that overrides him, not like some pure motive. And maybe that's revealed later on in the book where we discover actually no, it is a pure motive. But the next line is, then hate overcame Fëanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor and bade him gone. So it seemed...
Hate overcame fear.
Thanks.
This isn't Spaceballs, okay?
Yeah, Spaceballs. That's what it was. So I almost see that there's like a happy fault that happens here rather than some kind of like good motive. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't think it was a good motive. I just think Fëanor's perception, like he's able to see, it says his eyes burned through his fair semblance and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. So yeah, he sees Melkor's intention, and that leads to hate, just hate. And he shuts the door in the house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. I love that line.
That's definitely hate overcoming fear.
Yeah, exactly. That is the action that describes what's going on the inside for sure. You just slam the door in Melkor's face.
I love this description. It's at the beginning of that same paragraph, but it says that Melkor's cunning overreached his aim and his words touched too deep. It's just, he had done such a good job of playing everything subtle.
Yeah.
But his lust for the Silmarils kind of welled up in a way where he just like pushed a little too hard and it just all crumbled, Oh, so good.
Yeah, even the mention of the Silmarils set Fëanor off.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, this is probably a good place for us to stop now. More to come of the Silmarils and of Fëanor. If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarillions out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.
There's 1,000 Silmarillions.